Hello everyone. Let's talk about diversity and especially how to scale diversity. I'm presuming that we all agree that diversity in itself is a vital factor for the success of a team. Whether that team is a project team, a department, or a whole company is in that view not relevant. The main thing is that a team can handle the given tasks in a competitive and efficient manner. And having a diverse set of ideas, approaches, attitudes, etc. makes a team more competitive and more efficient. With all that out of the way, one of the first questions is, why am I telling you this? Am I qualified to talk about diversity? After all, I'm an old white male, so I should be the least qualified to talk about that subject. On the other hand, I'm also a team lead at BitExpert, a German software development company, and as such, I'm responsible for handling the staffing of my team. And if there is one thing that I learned in my past 20 plus years of professional software development career, it is that there are much more important things than being able to do a B-tree sort algorithm on a whiteboard. When I'm hiring, which I'm currently kind of doing, I'm usually looking for people with a diverse background. People that bring new talents, new views, new ideas to the table. And I'm also usually not trying to find someone that will fit into an existing team, because as soon as someone new starts to work in a team, that team is actually forming completely from scratch again. One of the things that I was thankfully able to learn at WeCamp. Therefore, the team will recreate, and usually, as long as everyone is respectful to everyone else, the new team will at least not be less efficient. But I'm not a professional on that matter. I can only tell you my experiences and about the stuff I have seen. This is just, though, to be said here to create a common ground from which I want to explore how we can scale these diversity aspects for a team. From a local level up to a global level, and what things we can do to actually get the best talents that are out there, now as well as in the future. Because here is my actual professional background kicking in. Sadly, I can't really say, why didn't I learn something decent? Because I did. I'm actually Master of Forestry Sciences. Don't ask. There are reasons why I ended up in software development that I will happily answer after this talk, as they are not really relevant here. But what is relevant is that the most important thing in forestry is that you do not harvest whatever you plant. Neither will your children or their children. The things you start out will influence and will be influenced by the upcoming generations. It's a generation contract. I'm doing the best I can now so that in the future me or my great-great-grandchildren will have the best of all options. That is one of the core principles of sustainability. Realizing that there might not be an immediate benefit, that I might not be the one gaining from that benefit. Why that becomes important, we will see in a minute or two. For now, let's have a look at the current situation when it comes to hiring in a lot of teams. Of course, we want only the best. And yet we generally already apply two exceptions. The first one is that those best actually accept to work for a salary that matches our range. And even though most of the time that range is not even given in the job advert, we generally expect contestants to express their expected salary in their cover letter. And often enough, people that would perfectly fit would get sorted out due to not matching that salary range. And the second implicit exception is generally that the person in question has to live within a certain distance around the common location of the team, so that they can commute daily to meet with the team in an office. Two exceptions to your rule to hire the best that make it actually almost impossible to hire them. So while you want the best, you most likely won't get them. And especially the location part will remove a number of candidates that might have the diverse background that you're looking for, but that are just not capable or willing to comply with that precondition of yours. So, cost aside, your potential to hire the best covers about 15,400 square kilometers of the Earth's surface, with an estimated commute distance of 70 kilometers, which is quite a lot. which is about 0.01% of the Earth's land surface. Yes, agreed. That's not equivalent to the number and distribution of people. So let's have, for example, a look at the Amsterdam metropolitan area. There are about 2.5 million people living there that one could reach with a job advert as described above in the area. That is about 0.03% of the world's population. Still not really that much. Okay, there might be people willing to relocate to Amsterdam for a great job opportunity. I know some. But even with those few willing to relocate, you are not able to gain the full potential. Luckily for a lot of us, there was this pandemic coming along. Okay, the pandemic itself was pretty devastating and has shown the worst in a lot of areas. And I'm not wanting to discuss the topic of a pandemic here in any way. But it has caused some of us to rethink how we work. Suddenly, teams were able to work in a decentralized way. Let me rephrase that. Suddenly, teams were forced to work in a decentralized way. And very often the internal structures were not well aligned with that. And working from home during a pandemic is something completely different than working remotely. But regardless of all these stressful things that happened, it suddenly allowed us to overcome this geographic restriction. We suddenly had to change from an on-site workflow to an off-site workflow. Digitize and document information that previously could be stored on-site, whether that was in a physical folder in a filing cabinet or in the head of colleague X that we could just walk up to. But that suddenly enabled us to hire from all over the world. Well, in most cases it didn't. With one restriction gone, there were now 2 new restrictions coming up. The first being the person needs to be within the country because tax and insurance rules. What do we as the hiring part need to figure out regarding employees that live in a different country? There is a hell of a lot of things to take care of to not make that a financial disaster or even land you in jail. So that is a pretty serious issue. On the other hand, it's not something that we can't overcome as a team, as that is a layer 10 problem. You might be able to solve that by not actually hiring the person as an employee, but by hiring the person as a full-time freelancer, which again might have some legal impacts, but I'm sure there might be ways around that. But the other restriction is one that you might actually again add implicitly. With video chat being so imminent now, it is so easy to have the team distributed but yet work together. So what is that restriction? Well, it's time zones. No, I'm not going to wander off, but having team meetings via video chat only works when you are all more or less working, or at least available at the same time. So again, this implicit restriction, which has something to do with how you organize your team and your teamwork, keeps you from getting the full potential. Yes, you now have a much wider number of possible applicants. But again, to stay at the example of the metropolitan area of Amsterdam, we are in essence talking about 3 to 4 time zones. That spans an area of around 15 degree west to 30 degree east, from somewhere like La Palma to somewhere like St. Petersburg, from North Pole to South Pole. So that includes already all of Europe and the entirety of Africa. That's pretty much already. But you're still missing out on America and Australia, not to talk about Asia. And to be honest, while we still have a pretty diverse setup within those 2 continents already, we are still missing out a lot of cultures. So what does that mean? We need to change. If we want to be able to get the full potential of possible hires, of new ideas, of different cultural backgrounds, of different ways of thinking, we need to adapt our own processes, our own way to work. Diversity is not something that we can put on top of our existing processes. It is not something that comes at no cost. Diversity is something that we have to actively embrace and work for. It means adapting our own processes as a company, as a team, and as an individual. And in this case, if we want to be able to tap into the whole global market, it means that we have to adapt our workflows from a synchronous workflow towards an asynchronous workflow. Document even more. Plan well in advance. Write everything into tickets, issues, tasks, cards, grocery lists, whatever you want to name them. Make everything as transparent as possible. And then also think about how you can get an adjustable table into the last area on the globe, in case you want to hire someone from there. Once we are there, we have reached peak diversity. Well, have we? Sure we have. We can hire every talent no matter where they live. Can we? While we have solved the geographical and the time zone restrictions, there are still two implicit restrictions open. The first being the salary range. Well, that's easy. Now that we can hire worldwide, as we can hire from all those countries with cheap labor. Sorry to say so, but what if the actual talent that we want and need comes from, lives in, and doesn't want to relocate New York? They clearly are out of salary range. I have no good idea on that topic. And we don't need to go as far as New York. Try to hire someone from Switzerland and you will have the same issue. Cost of living there is much higher than in Amsterdam. And it might still be high in Amsterdam, but believe me, Zurich is higher. The question you will have to ask yourself is the person and the person's contribution to your team worth it? If it is, then you will have to bite the bullet and pay the person whatever needs to be paid. But how do you calculate what needs to be paid? Well, this is a rather personal approach here, and you will most certainly find different ones and most certainly also contradicting ones. Check them and use the one you're comfortable with, or the one that you can sell to your stakeholders, or the one that fits best to your needs. But in my opinion, a team member should be able to afford a certain standard of living. Which one that is completely up to you. But you will need to think about that. What standard of living should my team members be able to afford? Should they be able to buy a new yacht every other week? Or should they just be able to go out with their significant other once a month to the next pizza place? Or should they barely be able to make ends meet? It's up to you. But once you've figured out a standard of living, you can figure out how much that person in New York or Switzerland needs to be paid to be able to afford that. And that will be more than their colleagues in Amsterdam get, at least in terms of converted euros. But not in terms of standard of living. That will need a lot of convincing to your current teammates why that person gets more money. And it will take some time until they realize that why they get more money, they will not get more luxury. And when we apply that to countries like Switzerland, we can also apply that to all other countries or areas. Last week I had a discussion with my significant other regarding salaries in Eastern Germany compared to Western Germany. And while I'm absolutely sick of that being the case, why can't we 30 years after the unification of Germany have the same salaries throughout the whole of Germany? Well, one of the reasons is that also the cost of living is a bit less in the eastern part of Germany. It doesn't add up completely, but when we want to apply that principle to different countries, we might also have to apply that within a country. And that would also mean that we need to figure out a way to calculate the cost of living and how much someone needs for a certain standard of living in whatever, Nepal, India, Uganda, Togo. The only thing I'm pretty sure of, it will be less than what the teammates in Amsterdam get. Is that exploitation? I wouldn't say so, but I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. My reasoning is that we would still allow the people from whatever country to afford a certain way of living. And would we pay everyone the same amount of money as their Amsterdam colleagues, there would be some team members that would be able to live in luxury, while others would barely make ends meet. And by paying luxury salaries in low-cost countries, that would, in addition, most possibly cause the local industry to collapse. And suddenly, we are thinking about things much wider in scope than our own team. We are thinking about how our payment might influence the way foreign nations might evolve. Pay developers for foreign countries dazzling salaries, and suddenly everyone might want to work for foreign companies, and the local industry collapses with whatever impact for the country. Of course, people in Kathmandu or Sofia, and I was lucky to actually meet a few developers in those places, have the same expectations to their work environment as others have, like working on a MacBook, have decent internet, well, not that that's complicated there, have an iPhone, so we will have to compensate for that. But on the other hand, the average salary in those countries is so low that it would allow our teammates to live in luxury, would we pay them the same amount of money? But as I said, those are my personal views on the topic of payment in a global team. And suddenly, we are deep into politics and sustainability. We're not only thinking about our generation, but also about how our decisions might influence other generations in foreign countries. But we've solved all our issues regarding worldwide hiring and being able to have the most diverse team that we can get. Have we really? We've solved issues regarding time zones, asynchronous work, payment in different countries and areas. What should stop us now? What about cultural differences? We don't need to go as far as India or Japan to find cultural differences. And cultural differences that might actually hinder our team. And while this is for sure an exaggeration and plays with stereotypes, it bears also a tiny bit of truth. And while I cannot back this with scientific studies, I have some anecdotal evidence, as that is called nowadays. I do have some friends from Eastern Europe that match exactly into that image. I also have some friends from Eastern Europe that do not match into that image. But either way, there are differences between different cultures that cause trouble within teams. And the farther the cultures are from one another, the more complicated it becomes to realize that there are differences. Imagine working together in a team where one person always says that everything is fine because they culturally fear to tell others that they failed. Failure in itself for Western European people is not a nice thing. We started to learn that failure is okay, hopefully. But when someone was raised within a culture where failure is a sign of weakness that is intolerable, and one rather dies than to accept that they failed, then you might realize you have an issue in your team, and not a small one. How can such a thing be solved? Telling them that failure is okay? Well, that might be an idea. But wouldn't that also mean telling them that their concept of failure is not accepted within the team? That their complete cultural background is not accepted within the team? That's pretty devastating and, at least to me, sounds like completely contrary towards the idea of a diverse team. After all, you hired that person also because of their different background. And now that background is considered wrong? Well, that worked pretty well for hundreds of years. That phase was called colonialization, in which the Western countries divided the world between them, and in which every country wanted to be like the Western countries. Some more, some less. And while I want to dig into that topic deeper, we still have to fight the aftermath of all that ruckus. And I'm not talking about wars, or at least not yet, but about things that we consider normal and standard while they aren't in other parts of the world. While we are all using English when we want to communicate with one another, why English? Why not French, or Spanish, or Portuguese, or even Dutch, or Russian, or Chinese? Because most of the countries throughout the world, at one point or another in their history in the last 500 years, came into contact with the British Empire. Yes, there are countries like China or Russia where that isn't the case. But as most of the countries can use English, we decided to use English as the main language. Well, and Esperanto just didn't fly. And believe me, once you're in a country where there is no English around, you can feel completely lost. What about dress code? Look at the way politicians throughout the world clothe. European. Calendars, European. Education, European. People want to attend the elite universities of the world, which are all in European hand. Sorry, but I'm counting the United States as Europe as well, as the US is based on Western European values here. So while we want to get a diverse setup, we have the issue that we have to integrate completely different ways of thinking into one team, which is hard. It doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means it is a shitload of work and requires a really subtle guidance to keep the balance. And we do not have to have people from China, India, Tanzania, Chile and Germany in one team to have such an explosive mixture. No need to have someone from Tel Aviv and someone from Damascus in one team. No need to have someone from the US and from Afghanistan in one team. It might be completely sufficient to have 4 people from Mannheim in that team. One with Algerian, one with Italian, one with Turkish ancestors, possibly an Israeli person as well. 4 different backgrounds that can cause a pretty explosive mixture. But it can also cause an extremely efficient team due to those differences. But those examples remind me of some other thing that will cause problems. What about having people in your team that come from areas that some country or other have beef with? You suddenly might run into issues that you can't even solve on your own. Like having awesome teammates from Nepal or Serbia that can't visit your team's in-person retreat due to them not getting a visa, either because of fear of them not going back or due to just too long processing times. Or that awesome person from Iran that suddenly is blocked from your code repository due to someone enforcing rules you do not have an influence on. Or that great person from China that suddenly can't access your company's VPN anymore. Or that brilliant lady from Afghanistan that suddenly doesn't reply anymore. Suddenly your diversity strategy doesn't work anymore because of some weird geopolitical situation. And such a situation might come up suddenly. I hope you got that lady out of Afghanistan safely, and hopefully well in advance. But sometimes these situations can happen without any announcement. And then you should have a plan B somewhere. So then, now we have indeed planned everything. We know how to handle actually diverse teams, how to tackle different cultural backgrounds, geopolitical difficulties, disasters. Now we are well prepared for our diverse hiring process. I'd say, yes, you are. But we might be looking at this from the wrong angle. You see, there is this thing called survivorship bias. During Second World War, US Navy engineers tried to figure out a way to easily increase the armor on planes. For that, they checked planes and figured out where they were hit, and at a first glance it looked easy to add some armor to reduce those hits. But on the second thought, the problem here is that our sample is wrong, as the planes that would have needed the additional armor weren't actually able to come back and be part of the sample. So those parts that have no hits are actually the most vulnerable parts that need to be secured. What does that mean for our case of diversity? Well, we are currently only able to look at those that actually made it to become a software engineer. We are not taking into account all those that just weren't able to make it. And that doesn't mean those that were able to become lawyers or builders or politicians. I'm talking about those that just weren't able to focus on an education at all. Those that weren't able to afford an education. We're talking about 25% of the world's population that has no secure access to enough food. 2 billion people that have other things on their mind than deciding whether to become a software engineer or a lawyer. 2 billion people that are literally struggling to make ends rise. 2 billion people where we don't need to care whether they speak English or French or Spanish, as they don't want to talk to us, as they have stuff to do to get some food onto the table. Now, this is not going to improve with our ongoing climate change. So by fighting climate change and other natural disasters, we can also increase the chance of those people to at least live a better life, and perhaps even reach the point where they can think about wanting to become an engineer. And even if we take them aside, there are still those hundreds of thousands of people that barely made it into school and that now can't afford a computer to start becoming a software developer. Luckily, there are schemes out there that help in those cases. I first stumbled upon them when a friend of mine told me about such schemes in Johannesburg, where he observed a group of kids that were able to use a school's computers after hours. And I was like, what the actual fuck? There are people out there wanting to learn this stuff, but can't because they can't afford it? And just the other day I read of Apps and Girls, a foundation in Tanzania that tours throughout the country to give especially young women access to computers and teach them how to program. And I assume there are dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of such or similar organizations around. All those need help, all the help they can get. To foster and grow the next generation of diverse teammates that we can hire. Or perhaps they can hire us? Why should we always be the ones that hire? Why shouldn't we work for a company in Iran or Chile or Mozambique or wherever? Sorry for delving into this topic of world politics while all we want is to hire a diverse set of people. But if you truly want diversity, that includes politics, not only on a local level, but also on a global level. Some things we might not be able to change, like world hunger. But some things we actually might be able to change. Like reducing electronic waste or waste in general. Like investing into reforestation schemes. Like avoiding things that require deforestation in the first place. Like supporting programs that help people to learn how to help themselves. Like avoiding huge power wastes like Bitcoin or NFT. Like, well, you get the picture. Support Phil or any other cause to apply the Boy Scout rule. Leave this place in a better state than you found it. Thank you very much.